One wrong snip with your pruners this fall, and you could be saying goodbye to next summer's blossoms. Sounds like a gardener's worst nightmare. For many, it's a harsh reality. Today, we'll dive into 4 of the most popular garden residents: Hydrangeas, Clematis, Peonies, and Hostas. I'll show you which ones need a ruthless trim and which you shouldn't even think about touching with your shears until spring. And I promise you'll learn the key secret that will forever banish your fear of fall pruning. Let's be honest, why do we even do all this? Fall preparation isn't just about tidying up your garden. It's essentially sending your plants off on a well-deserved winter break so they can wake up vibrant and full of energy next spring. The 2 main goals are protecting their root systems from freezing and, most importantly, preserving those precious flower buds. For some plants, these buds form long before winter even arrives. And this, my friends, is where the main challenge lies. Let's kick things off with the queen of the garden herself, the hydrangea. She's beautiful, but she's also challenged the patience of many a gardener. These lush, show-stopping blooms are enough to mesmerize anyone. That is, until you find yourself holding a pair of pruning shears. When autumn arrives and you stand before it, one nagging question inevitably pops into your head: to cut or not to cut? And if you do decide to prune, how exactly should you do it to ensure you don't end up with a gorgeous bush of green leaves, but not a single bloom next season? The main secret that divides hydrangeas into 2 distinct groups is actually quite simple. You just need to understand which type of growth they bloom on. Do they bloom on last year's growth, or on new stems that will emerge next spring? Sounds confusing? Don't worry, I'll break it down for you. Consider the bigleaf hydrangea, Hydrangea macrophylla, that iconic variety known for its massive pink, blue, or purple flower heads. Here's the key rule for bigleaf hydrangeas: they bloom on old wood. This means the flower buds for next summer are already formed and dormant at the end of this growing season. They're nestled on the stems, patiently waiting for spring. So, what happens if we decide to prune it heavily right now? Exactly! We'll simply snip off all of our future blooms. That's why, when autumn arrives, you need to approach your bigleaf hydrangea with pruning shears very, very delicately. Your only task is to remove the spent, dried-up flower heads. Make a clean cut just above the highest set of healthy, live buds. And that's it. Leave everything else untouched. But pruning is only half the battle for this somewhat fussy beauty. To ensure those precious flower buds survive, they must be protected from winter frosts. That's why winter protection for your bigleaf hydrangea isn't just a recommendation, it's a mandatory requirement for abundant, beautiful blooms. Panicle and smooth hydrangeas, however, are a completely different story. These are our reliable, predictable garden friends that don't require any special fuss. Their true beauty lies in the fact that they bloom on new wood, meaning the growth that develops in the current year. What does this mean? It means their flower buds only form in spring, on the fresh, young branches that emerge that season. Because of this, you can't accidentally prune away next year's blooms in the fall. They simply haven't formed yet. That's why pruning them isn't just an option, it's essential. Aggressive fall pruning stimulates the growth of strong, robust shoots for the following season, and the stronger and thicker the shoot, the larger and more abundant its flower clusters will be. It's all very simple and logical. So how exactly do you prune them? Simply shorten last year's stems, leaving 2 to 4 pairs of buds on each. Don't be afraid. Also, remove any thin, weak or inwardly growing branches. Our goal is to leave a strong, well-ventilated framework from which vigorous new growth will emerge in the spring. And unlike their bigleaf cousins, these hardy hydrangeas don't require winter protection in most regions. Now let's look up to the trellises and talk about climbers, specifically Clematis. These beautiful plants sure know how to baffle a beginner gardener with their seemingly mysterious pruning groups. First, second, third. It sounds like a complicated school assignment, but in reality, it's much simpler once you understand the basic principle. And just like with hydrangeas, it all comes down to where the flowers bloom, on old wood or new. So, let's dive into pruning group 1. This group includes Clematis varieties that bloom earliest, typically in May and June. They bloom exclusively on old wood, the previous year's growth that has overwintered. These are often referred to as alpina, macropetala, or montana types. If you cut these back in the fall, they'll grow plenty of green foliage in the spring, but you'll get absolutely no flowers. 0. So here's the golden rule. For group 1, keep those pruners away in the fall. The most you should do is a light tidy up, snip out any dry or damaged stems, and that's all. After they finish blooming in the spring, you can thin out the plant a bit if it's too dense. But in the fall, hands off. Now let's discuss group 2 Clematis and their pruning. These are the trickiest Clematis because they bloom twice a season. Their first, most abundant flush of blooms appears in early summer on the previous year's overwintered growth. A second, slightly more modest wave follows in late summer, this time on the current year's new growth. This dual flowering habit means their pruning strategy must be combined. If we prune them hard in the fall, we'll lose that spectacular first flush of blooms. But you can't just leave all the old growth either. That's why we opt for a lighter, more gentle pruning method. Our goal is to shorten the stems by about a third, aiming for a height of roughly 1 to 1.5 meters from the ground. We also completely remove any weak, soft, or herbaceous growth. Only strong, woody stems should remain. Carefully detach these from their support, coil them gently, and lay them down on the ground. Then cover them for winter protection. This method helps preserve last year's growth for that early, spectacular bloom, while also encouraging new shoots to develop and flower later in the season. And finally, we come to the third pruning group. This is the easiest, most straightforward, and often the most popular among gardeners. This group includes Clematis varieties that bloom late in the season, typically from midsummer right through autumn. Their flowers appear exclusively on new shoots that have grown in the current year. Because of this, they have absolutely no need for the previous year's growth. In fact, those old stems just get in the way. So, in autumn, grab your pruners and be decisive. You need to cut back all the above-ground growth of these Clematis very short. How short exactly? We're talking about leaving just short stubs with 2 to 3 pairs of buds above the soil line. That's roughly 6 to 8 inches. Don't worry, you won't hurt the plant. Quite the opposite, you'll be giving it a boost. This kind of severe cutback encourages strong new shoots to emerge from the base in spring, leading to a uniformly flowered plant, not just a few blooms at the very top. This makes them the easiest Clematis to maintain, with no complicated overwintering of old stems. Simply prune, mulch the base, and you're all set for a successful winter. But what do you do if you bought a Clematis without a tag? Or perhaps you just forgot which pruning group it belongs to? Sound familiar? You're standing there, pruners in hand, staring at a mass of green, terrified of making a fatal cut. Don't panic. There's a simple solution. If you're unsure about your Clematis' pruning group, opt for a universal gentle method that's ideal for Group 2 Clematis. Simply cut back all the shoots by about a third to a half, aiming for a height of about 1 meter or 3 feet from the ground. Why this particular approach? Let's think logically. If your Clematis happens to be a Group 1, which typically requires little to no pruning, you'll certainly lose some of the lower blooms. However, the upper sections of the stems will remain and still flower beautifully. If it's a Group 3, which usually gets cut back hard, it will produce strong new growth from the remaining stubs in spring and will still flower, perhaps just a little later in the season. And if you happen to be right, and it is a Group 2, then congratulations, you've done everything perfectly. This compromise method acts as your safeguard against a critical mistake. It ensures you'll get at least some blooms no matter what. Then, the following year, you can observe your plant carefully and precisely determine its group based on its flowering time and specific characteristics. Now let's shift gears and come back down to earth to talk about every gardener's good old friends, peonies. These beauties certainly won't make you scratch your head with complicated pruning schemes. With peonies, everything is straightforward, logical and predictable. And that's precisely why we adore them. The main guide for pruning peonies isn't your calendar, but rather the weather and the plant's own condition. There's no need to rush and cut back green foliage immediately after it finishes blooming. Throughout the rest of summer and into early autumn, the plant uses its leaves to store nutrients in its powerful roots. This builds up its energy reserves for winter and ensures a spectacular display of flowers the following year. Wait for the first hard frosts. Usually after these, the entire above-ground portion of the peony will wilt, turn brown, and collapse to the ground. This is your signal to act. By this point, the foliage has completed its vital work, and you can confidently remove it. Grab a sharp pair of pruners and cut all the stems back, almost flush with the ground. Leave small stumps, just about 2 to 3 centimeters or an inch high. This helps you easily locate the plant in spring and prevents accidental damage. What's more, by clearing away all the old leaves, you're performing excellent preventative maintenance against fungal diseases, whose spores often overwinter on plant debris. One common question that comes up after pruning peonies is whether they need to be covered. Since we've cut back all the above-ground growth, it's natural to think the roots left in the ground might get cold. Let me put your mind at ease. Mature, well-established peony plants are incredibly winter hardy. They can withstand even harsh winters without any additional protection. Their robust root system delves deep into the soil, far below the frost line, where freezing temperatures are no threat. So for any peony plant that's 2 or 3 years old or more, you have absolutely nothing to worry about. The only exception applies to young plants, particularly those planted this year. Their root system hasn't had time to fully establish or grow deep enough, making them more vulnerable. These first-year plants do benefit from mulching for their initial winter. Create a small mound, about 4 to 6 inches high, 10 and 15 centimeters, using peat, compost, or even just garden soil, directly over the plant. This will be perfectly sufficient to protect the tender young growth buds from freezing. In spring, once the snow has melted, be sure to carefully remove this protective layer. And finally, we turn our attention to the queen of the shade garden, the hosta. When it comes to this plant, autumn pruning is a surprisingly controversial topic. Gardeners are sharply divided into 2 camps, and each side has compelling arguments. Let's break down the arguments for each approach. The first camp consists of those who advocate for autumn pruning. Their main argument centres on cleanliness and plant hygiene. After the first frosts, hosta leaves often turn into an unpleasant, slimy mass. Frankly, it's not a very aesthetic sight, but crucially, these decaying leaves create an ideal moist and dark environment, perfect for slugs and their eggs to overwinter. By removing the foliage in autumn, you effectively deny these pests a cosy home, thereby reducing their population for the following year. There's certainly a clear logic to this approach. Hosta foliage should be cut back only after it has fully yellowed and naturally collapsed to the ground. The second camp, conversely, consists of those who oppose autumn pruning. Their core argument is simple. Nature knows best. Foliage that naturally dies back provides an additional layer of insulation for the plant's root system. This acts as a natural layer of mulch, protecting the dormant buds from severe frosts, particularly during snowless winters. In spring, the old leaves can be easily raked away without causing any harm to the tender young shoots as they emerge, and there's certainly wisdom in this approach too. So, what's the conclusion to this whole hosta trimming debate? The answer, as it so often is, isn't black and white. Cutting back hostas in the fall is less about the plant's survival and more about your gardening style, aesthetic preferences, and pest control strategy. Hostas are incredibly resilient and low-maintenance plants. They'll overwinter just fine whether you cut back their foliage or leave their old leaves to provide natural cover. So you're free to choose the method that makes the most sense for you and your garden. If slugs are a significant problem in your garden, it's definitely worth removing the foliage in the fall to prevent providing them with a cosy winter home and breeding ground. If you prefer a neat, tidy garden and the sight of decaying leaves spoils your aesthetic, then by all means, cut them back. On the other hand, if you lean towards natural gardening practices, don't mind a little mess, or live in a region with harsh, snowless winters, Leaving the foliage until spring provides excellent natural insulation. Either way, you won't be harming the plant. And now for a final crucial tip that benefits not just hostas, but essentially all the perennials we've touched upon today. Mulching. Once you've finished any trimming, apply a generous layer of mulch around the base of your perennial plants. A 2 to 3 inch or 5 to 7 centimetre layer of compost, aged manure, or peat acts like a warm blanket for their root systems. This mulch will protect the roots from sudden temperature swings, help retain moisture, and break down to provide essential nutrients in the spring. It's a simple, yet incredibly effective technique to help your beloved plants comfortably survive the winter. And now, for that crucial turning point I promised. The biggest mistake gardeners make isn't in how they prune, but in not understanding why they're doing it. We tend to think that in autumn, everything needs a tidy trim and a good prune. But that's not always the case. Picture this. You lovingly and diligently prune a lush, bigleaf hydrangea, treating it like a panicle variety, cutting it back severely. And just like that, you've completely robbed yourself of all its flowers for the entire next year. You'll spend an entire season admiring beautiful green foliage, but not a single bloom will appear. That's because the flower buds were already formed on those very branches, simply waiting for spring to arrive. Conversely, if you're too hesitant to prune a Group 3 Clematis, it will quickly turn into an overgrown, tangled mess, with only a few sparse flowers blooming high at the very top. So here's the key. It's not the shears that dictate your plant's blooming potential, but your understanding of its needs. To summarise, bigleaf hydrangeas, do not prune, but do protect them for winter. Panicle and smooth hydrangeas, go ahead and prune them back confidently. Clematis, know your pruning group, that's the absolute key. Peonies and hostas are quite forgiving. Autumn pruning for them is more about garden hygiene and aesthetics. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope your perennials are now well prepared for winter and will reward you with an incredible display of blooms next season. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new tips. And now, a question for you. Which perennials give you the most trouble when preparing for winter? Let me know in the comments below, and we might just make a video about it.